Want to welcome to the program right now a professor of law at Nova Southeastern University in Florida. Randolph Bracha-Largue is with us. Randolph, thank you for your time, sir.
Oh, you're welcome.
So you have a really interesting piece here. Guns do belong on campus. Unfortunately, the Florida legislature has adjourned, and the campus carry bill, which showed, I think, a lot of promise early on in the session, sort of got stalled over on the House side. But you are a supporter of campus carry.
Oh, absolutely. I've been teaching at law school for 31 years.
A lot of people would be surprised to hear that a professor who's been on campus for 31 years actually supports the idea of people with concealed carry licenses being able to legally and lawfully carry on a college campus. Have you always felt this way?
Well, I've always believed myself to be a person of reason. But you said many people would be surprised. I don't think you'd be surprised if I were to send you some of the email I received. When the Miami Herald printed this, they printed my email address. And, obviously I received email from people who either didn't read or didn't understand, and they're going by emotion. It's like so many of our decisions are made by emotion. I think this doesn't start with the NRA or me or anybody else. It goes back to the founding of the Republic and probably before that, which is you either choose freedom or security. Give up freedom for security, you'll have neither.
Absolutely. And I got to say, Professor, I agree with you. I think the anti-campus carry argument really is very emotional. It also seems like, depending on what campus you look at, it's either very prevalent or, I guess it varies from campus to campus. I've seen some campuses that have actually passed resolutions in support of campus carry. Do you have an idea what the student population there, I know the Southeastern, feels about the issue or thinks about the issue?
I don't. I make it a point to not discuss politics with students when I'm teaching a class. I'm the advisor to the Federalist Society. Of course, at those meetings we discuss politics, but that's the whole point. We really discuss the Constitution. But I think it's improper for law professors or professors of any subject to use the classroom as a forum to vent their own ideas, unless it's related to the subject matter, in which case you have to be open. I think it's been observed by many people that our campuses are really not. We believe in diversity in everything except ideas. So I don't know what the students think. I suspect that a number of students, as in the general population, support guns on campus. Others are against guns on campus. It's hard to tell because, there are certain opinions that are considered educated opinions. And it's made very clear, depending on the society you're in, that if you don't hold those opinions, you must be an idiot. And given that, we do a very good job, I say we in general, indoctrinating students probably from first grade as to what they're expected, what the intelligent view is. So by the time they get to law school, it's a graduate school, they pretty much know what they're supposed to think. And a lot of them, frankly, have just accepted it because they've only been exposed to one point of view. And that's because we get them from these colleges, which are little more than institutions for indoctrination. But that's very sad, but it's a fact.
So I'm curious, and when supposedly college is that place where you go and you challenge yourself and you learn all kinds of new ideas. And I'm wondering, when you find those students, or even, I guess students in particular, who may, swim upstream, go against the grain a little bit, is the tendency to just sort of put your head down and say, well, I'm done here in 4 years, so I'm not going to draw attention to myself. I'm just going to get out of here as soon as I can.
Well, I think that's probably the logical thing to do for most students, and only a few are willing to buck the trend and risk the opprobrium of professors who don't think they're very smart. I'm happy that, but by the time they get to graduate school and they're already thinking of practicing law, by that time they've studied the Constitution, they're starting to study the Constitution, and they start to appreciate it, and they're more willing to question. Now, initially, like all students, they just want a good grade. So initially, in the first year, in many classes, I'm sure they're just prepared to regurgitate what the Supreme Court has said. But it depends on how you teach the class. I mean, it really does. If a person takes I won't mention a particular case, but when I teach criminal law, the very first case I teach, I spend a whole week on that case, and we go through it line by line. And I tell my students, only a little bit tongue-in-cheek by the time they're done, is I said, now you know how to brief a case, now you know how to read it, and now you know that when the Supreme Court says it's doing something for this reason, that's not necessarily true. And when they're doing it because they say it's in the Constitution, that's not necessarily true. And the third thing you know is that given this opinion, you no longer have to feel inferior to anybody who went to Harvard Law, where most of these Supreme Court justices went.
Right.
So it's just, and I think if you teach a class that way, you encourage students, which is what we're supposed to do, to think, to challenge, to question. They arrive at that. And if they don't, they have the tools when they leave law school. By the way, I think it's hard to tell, partially because students are, as you said, they're hesitant to speak up.
Absolutely. But to that end, the one of the big arguments that we've seen against campus carry is that, these college students, they're all drunken idiots. Can you imagine, Professor, if we had campus carry where I would have drunken college students just strolling into class with a beer in one hand and a gun in the other? And it really seems like, we're selling college students really short. I know that there's no shortage of stories of the sort of campus silliness that goes on that makes you think maybe we are raising a generation of adult babies. But I still believe, for the most part, that the college students that are there on campus, particularly those who are of age to be concealed carry holders, those who have taken the time to become concealed carry holders, that these are responsible individuals.
Well, you raise an interesting point. And actually, you raise a couple interesting points. The first one is this, and that's if you treat someone as a child, the person will behave as a child. If you treat someone as an adult, the person behaves as an adult. Let me start with Florida. Florida, unlike Vermont, if you can believe it, requires certification to have a concealed carry permit. And while it's not a lot of shooting, it does require some proficiency with your weapon. So it's not everybody, as you said, and they have to pass a background test who can have the gun on campus. That's number one. Number two, even if you had a situation such as Vermont where you didn't need a permit, knowing that other people had guns, this probably sounds, I don't mean it to be facetious, this would be a much more polite society. Think about the way that young boys learn to interact on the playground. And I think you learn right away how to behave with other people because there are consequences if you don't. Not from the teachers necessarily, although a different type of consequences. And it would be the same thing. These young children who, when they go to shouldn't say children, young students, when they join a fraternity, they drink to excess because that's what's expected of them. That's what they're doing. That's why they joined it. They decide it's permissible to be responsible. It's pretty much like going to Carnival in Rio de Janeiro. You're supposed to be irresponsible. But when they go to work, when they go to classes, they're very sober. They behave differently because that's what's expected of them. So they can adjust. The other thing is this, if you're concerned, and a lot of people, I think a good argument, and I've heard this from a lot of my friends who were in the military, they're despondent that the police are so poorly trained. You had the police in Boston who end up shooting each other because they're so poorly trained. And so that's another reason. Well, the answer to that is let's go back to training children at earliest age possible how to respect, use guns. When I went to camp, the thing we all looked forward to was going on the range.
Yeah.
It was just, and there was a time when that was much more common knowledge for students. When they were growing up, their parents taught them about weapons. Now we're terrified of them. You know what it reminds me of? I'm sorry to talk on so much. The story of Sleeping Beauty?
Yes, sir.
That we tell our children. Do you remember how that starts? That starts because her parents were so afraid that she would prick her finger on a spindle that instead of teaching her, this is a spindle, this is what can happen, we're not going to touch it, instead they try to hide them all. So the first time she sees one, she pricks her finger on it. That's analogous to guns.
Absolutely, it is.
But the thing is, the common sense that we teach our children with these stories are reflections of adult behavior. It's just that we don't necessarily make the connection after we're adults.
It strikes me, Professor, as we're talking here that, there are adult daycares that are now opening in Brooklyn. Maybe we need to start teaching some of these fairy tales to these precious snowflakes again. Maybe, a lot of lessons still to be gleaned from these, I think.
Well, let me say something else. I think there are, but I think the way you do it is relating it to their everyday life that they understand. For example, right now, as everybody has heard, because you can't avoid it, it's in the media, there are some people who don't want their children to be vaccinated. And the way I've explained this to people is like the unwillingness to protect children from bacteria, in other words, killers. The parents aren't willing to do it if it means vaccinating their children, which is the same thing as arming teachers. In other words, they're more afraid of the theoretical harm, whether it's from a gun on campus or from the vaccination, than they are the very real harm of either a crippling disease or someone coming on campus. It's just an analogy such as that's obvious, but they don't see it that way. I don't know.
I'm curious, Professor. I know you say that you don't bring politics into the classroom. Have you talked about this subject with your fellow faculty members at all?
Oh yes. Well, I think I'm clearly in the minority because the enlightened view is we shouldn't have guns on campus. I have no problem if we lived in a society where everybody respected the law. Mm-hmm. But think about this: why do you and I need laws? In a truly civil society, we shouldn't need laws. We need laws because some people are don't know how to behave, and so we say this is how you behave. Well, the next question is: so why do you need policemen? Well, we need policemen because somebody will misbehave. Well, why should the policemen be armed? Well, because the people who misbehave may be armed. This is just logical. This is not a society of angels. I wish it were. If it were a society of angels, none of us would need weapons. But it's not.
That's where we get it. Usually that's where they go to the argument of, well, that's why we need to ban all the guns. And then you ask them, okay, well, who's going to take away the 300 million firearms? And they give you this sort of perplexed look. But I think you're absolutely right.
The other thing, the argument to banning guns is, it's almost, think about this for a moment. There's also been a big problem. The media tells us, and I know there is a problem to some extent. How large is I don't know, but it's certainly true that there are too many rapes. One rape is too many, but too many rapes on campus. Well, there's a simple solution. If you arm all the co-eds, you end the rapes.
Oh.
So if you want to take an Ann Coulter-like approach, mm-hmm. whenever someone's anti-gun, you say, well, you must be pro-rape then. Obviously it's silly, but that's the way they argue.
Right. Well, yeah, and the counter argument would be, see, they're all drunks, Professor. We get back to they're all drunks, and alcohol fuels a lot of these sexual assaults. And you're telling a drunk girl to carry a gun. What kind of monster are you? Now you can point to real individuals who were stone cold sober, who were sexually assaulted on college campus, who were concealed carry holders, and who were denied their ability to carry, and those lives all of a sudden don't matter. A lot of times the gun control advocates say, well, look, if it saves just one life, except when it comes to campus carry, because then, it has to save some greater number of lives, and it has to be able to impact every potential sexual assault.
That's a good point. And something else that I ask people, and they never answer this. I started asking in a different way. I started asking my colleagues, let me ask you something. Let's say you're in your classroom, you're teaching 75 students, and you know that those 75 include, let's say, 5 or 10 who have a concealed carry permit, but like me, they're law-abiding, they don't bring their gun on campus. And so someone walks in and he says, I'm going to kill everybody here. Before he does that, what do you say to those 5 or 10 people? Don't worry, you're dying for my ideal? And the more sophisticated, what I say now is if you could give a gun, if you could go back in time and give a gun to just one of the Virginia Tech victims just before the shooting started, would you have given him the gun? Or Sandy Hook, if you could have given that principal or one of the teachers huddled in her classroom trying to protect her children by wishing the gunman wouldn't enter, would you have wanted either the principal or that teacher to have a gun? They never answer that question. Because if they say no, then that means they're putting ideology ahead of all those lives of children. So they just, I want to pretend that that's not the world. Let's live in the world I wish we lived in. Mm-hmm. Let me pretend the world's different. Let's pretend that we have unicorns and pixie dust, and that's how we'll solve our solutions. It's ridiculous. The trouble is it's emotional. These people aren't logical.
Talking with Professor Randolph Brache-Larguet. And Professor, listen, I really appreciate you joining us today. We were unfortunately almost out of time, but I would love to talk to you again in the future. And one last question for you. I assume you have tenure, and that's why you're okay speaking out, or would you be speaking out anyway? Is this just an important enough issue for you that you think you need to be heard?
When I was interviewing for a job here, in my interview, and at every job I've had, I'm always myself, I was criticizing the ACLU for a position they had on a certain case. And so the faculty well knew many years ago when they hired me that I was going to speak my mind. It's a very good faculty. It's a very tolerant faculty with different points of view. At the moment, I think I'm one of the few Republicans. I'm sure there must be another one.
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on the program, sir. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope we can do this again.
I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you.
I did as well, very much. Randolph Braccio-Larguet, professor of law at Nova Southeastern University.